In the heart of Mexico, where the war on drugs has shaped the lives of millions, one name has long stood above the rest: Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. A figure both feared and revered, he built an empire that spanned continents, fueled by violence, betrayal, and an unwavering pursuit of power. But in the brutal world of the cartels, no one is untouchable. Not even the family of the most powerful drug lord in the world. This is the story of a vendetta so savage, it shook the foundations of the Sinaloa Cartel. A war that began not in the streets, but in the shadows, where alliances crumble, trust is fleeting, and revenge is measured in blood. It was a conflict that would claim the life of one of El Chapo's own sons, a young man barely into adulthood, whose only crime was being the heir to his father's throne. To understand this tragedy, we must go back to the moment where it all began. A single betrayal, a fracture in a once unbreakable brotherhood. And a decision that set in motion a chain of events leading to the cold-blooded execution of Édgar Guzmán López. An event that would go down as one of the most infamous acts of revenge in Mexico's violent drug war. For years, the Sinaloa Cartel operated as a well-oiled machine, a network built on both blood and loyalty. Among its most powerful factions was the Beltrán Leyva Organization, led by four brothers: Arturo, Alfredo, Hector, and Carlos Beltrán Leyva. They were more than just allies to El Chapo Guzmán. They were family in everything but name, rising through the ranks together, forging one of the deadliest drug syndicates Mexico had ever seen. But in the world of the cartels, alliances are only as strong as the next betrayal. On January 20, 2008, the Mexican government struck a devastating blow to the Beltrán Leyva Organization. Alfredo Beltrán Leyva, one of its top leaders, was arrested in Culiacán, Sinaloa, in a dramatic operation carried out by elite federal forces. He was captured with an arsenal of weapons and millions in cash, his power stripped away in an instant. To the Beltrán Leyva brothers, this was no mere coincidence. Someone had tipped off the authorities. Someone close. Someone with access to the highest levels of cartel intelligence, and their suspicions quickly turned to the man they had once considered a brother, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. Whispers of betrayal spread like wildfire. It was rumored that El Chapo had sacrificed Alfredo to law enforcement in a calculated move to consolidate his own power. Whether true or not, the damage was done. The arrest shattered the fragile peace between the two factions, turning old allies into sworn enemies. And in the world of the cartels, there was only one way to answer such a betrayal: revenge, ruthless, immediate, and deeply personal. The arrest of Alfredo Beltrán Leyva was more than just a loss. It was an unforgivable act of treachery. The bond that had once held the Sinaloa Cartel together was shattered. Arturo Beltrán Leyva, the eldest and most ruthless of the brothers, was consumed by rage. In his eyes, the betrayal was clear. El Chapo had fed Alfredo to the authorities to eliminate a rival and strengthen his own control over the cartel. For years, the Beltrán Leyva brothers had fought alongside El Chapo, smuggling countless tons of cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine into the United States. They had bribed officials, controlled entire cities, and built an empire worth billions. But now, everything they had worked for was at risk. Arturo knew that if he did not strike back, his organization would crumble. Respect in the cartel world was maintained through bloodshed, and nothing demanded a response more than betrayal. Almost overnight, the once powerful alliance dissolved. The Beltrán Leyva Organization split from the Sinaloa Cartel, transforming former allies into bitter enemies. What had once been a united front against rival drug syndicates turned into an all-out war within Sinaloa itself. Assassins were deployed, corrupt officials were bribed to switch allegiances, and a new wave of violence began, with each side determined to annihilate the other. But Arturo Beltrán Leyva was not just looking for war. He wanted something more. He wanted to send a message, one so devastating that it would shake El Chapo to his core. And there was only one way to do that. If El Chapo had taken his brother, then Arturo would take something even more precious in return. He would go after El Chapo's family. The streets of Sinaloa were no stranger to violence, but the betrayal between El Chapo and the Beltrán Leyva brothers ignited something even deadlier, a war without limits, where no one was off limits. Arturo Beltrán Leyva, now fully committed to revenge, unleashed his fury with ruthless precision. His first targets were high-ranking members of the Sinaloa Cartel. Bodies started turning up across the region, executed, tortured, left as warnings. But Arturo wasn't satisfied with simply picking off lieutenants and foot soldiers. He wanted to hit El Chapo where it hurt the most. With government ties of his own, Arturo used his influence to bribe corrupt officials, police commanders, and military officers, ensuring that his assassins could operate freely. He struck at the very structure that kept El Chapo in power, weakening his supply lines, turning former allies against him, and even assassinating government figures suspected of siding with the Sinaloa Cartel. One of the most high-profile murders during this period was that of Édgar Eusebio Milan Gomez, the commissioner of the Mexican Federal Police. Arturo's men ambushed and killed Milan inside his own home, sending a chilling message: no one was untouchable. The war was escalating rapidly, and each assassination only fueled the bloodshed. But Arturo had an even bigger target in mind. The ultimate revenge wouldn't come from killing El Chapo's men. It wouldn't come from bribing his allies or even attacking his business. It would come from striking at the one thing no cartel boss could ever truly protect: his own family. El Chapo had taken his brother. Now Arturo would take his son. In the world of the cartels, family is both a source of strength and the greatest vulnerability. El Chapo Guzmán, despite his reputation as one of the most powerful drug lords in history, knew that no amount of money, influence, or security could fully shield his loved ones from the brutal realities of his empire. And now, with the Beltrán Leyva Organization waging war against him, his family had become prime targets. Arturo Beltrán Leyva was not interested in symbolic attacks or mere intimidation. He wanted to break El Chapo in the most personal way possible. And to do that, he set his sights on El Chapo's 22-year-old son, Édgar Guzmán López. Unlike his father, Édgar was not a hardened criminal mastermind. He had been raised in privilege, shielded from the harshest aspects of the cartel's business. Though he was involved in his father's operations, he lacked the paranoia and survival instincts of a seasoned drug lord. He moved freely through Culiacán, often spotted at high-end restaurants, parties, and shopping centers without the heavily armed security teams that protected his father. To Arturo, Édgar was the perfect target: young, visible, and most importantly, unprepared. Killing a rival cartel member would make a statement, but assassinating El Chapo's own son would be a declaration of total war. It would prove that no one was safe. The hit was planned with precision. Arturo's men tracked Édgar's movements, studying his habits, his favorite places, and the people he surrounded himself with. He was not an easy target. His last name alone meant that even casual interactions were carefully monitored. But every man has his weaknesses, and Édgar's was his sense of invincibility. He had grown up under his father's shadow, believing that his last name was a shield. He never saw the betrayal coming. Arturo's assassins were ready. The orders had been given. And on a seemingly ordinary evening in Culiacán, as Édgar and his friends went about their night, death was waiting. May 8, 2008, Culiacán, Sinaloa. The sun had set over the city, casting long shadows across the streets as Édgar Guzmán López and his companions made their way to one of Culiacán's upscale shopping centers. It was a place of comfort and familiarity, a world away from the blood-soaked battlefields where his father's empire fought for survival. Here, he was not the son of Mexico's most notorious drug lord. He was simply Édgar, a 22-year-old enjoying an evening out. But he was being watched. Arturo Beltrán Leyva's men had tracked his every move for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment, and tonight their patience would pay off. As Édgar stepped out into the parking lot, surrounded by friends, the air was suddenly pierced by a deafening roar. The night erupted in gunfire. It was an ambush of overwhelming force. At least 15 heavily armed sicarios, cartel assassins, emerged from the shadows. They were armed with AK-47s, AR-15s, and grenade launchers. Weapons of war intended to ensure there would be no escape. The parking lot transformed into a kill zone, bullets ripping through the air in all directions. Édgar never stood a chance. His body was torn apart in the hail of gunfire, his blood staining the pavement before he could even reach for a weapon. His companions, too, were gunned down without mercy. The sheer volume of bullets, over 500 rounds fired, left the scene unrecognizable, The once bustling shopping center, now a battlefield littered with shattered glass, twisted metal, and lifeless bodies. By the time the gunman disappeared into the night, leaving behind only chaos and destruction, Édgar Guzmán López was dead. The son of El Chapo had been executed in a message written in blood, a warning that no one, not even the most powerful, could escape the wrath of the betrayed. Word spread quickly. Within hours, news of the assassination sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. The message from Arturo Beltrán Leyva was clear. If El Chapo had taken his brother, Arturo had taken something even more precious in return. But in the world of the cartels, vengeance never ends with a single act. This was only the beginning, and the bloodshed that followed would only deepen the scars of this relentless war. The murder of Édgar Guzmán López sent shockwaves through the Sinaloa Cartel. The son of the most powerful drug lord in Mexico had been slaughtered in the streets, gunned down in a hail of bullets. The sheer brutality of the attack, over 500 rounds fired, was not just an assassination. It was an act of war. For Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, the news was both devastating and enraging. His son had been executed in broad daylight in his own stronghold of Culiacán. It was a direct insult, a challenge that could not go unanswered. Almost immediately, the gears of retaliation were set in motion. El Chapo's vast network of spies, informants, and killers mobilized. Streets were flooded with whispers of impending retribution. No one in the Beltrán Leyva Organization would be safe. But Arturo Beltrán Leyva was no ordinary rival. He had built his own empire, and he was just as ruthless, just as cunning. He knew that El Chapo's response would be swift, and he was prepared. He reinforced his security, moved his operations deeper into the shadows, and surrounded himself with an army of killers willing to die at his command. Meanwhile, Édgar's funeral was held in Culiacán, attended by hundreds. The grief was palpable, but so was the anger. In the world of the cartels, funerals were not just moments of mourning, they were declarations of the wars to come. The streets of Sinaloa became even more dangerous in the days that followed. Bodies turned up in alleys, safe houses were raided, and suspected informants were executed. The violence escalated beyond anything seen before. The death of Édgar had changed the game entirely. This was no longer just business. This was deeply personal. And for El Chapo, the hunt for Arturo Beltrán Leyva had just begun. The murder of Édgar Guzmán López was not just a tragedy for El Chapo, it was an unforgivable provocation. The streets of Culiacán, already accustomed to cartel violence, braced for the inevitable retaliation. And when El Chapo struck back, he did so with the full force of the Sinaloa Cartel behind him. Almost immediately, Arturo Beltrán Leyva's men started disappearing. Some were found executed, their bodies left with chilling messages carved into their flesh, warnings of what was to come. Others simply vanished, their fates unknown, swallowed by the brutal efficiency of El Chapo's death squads. Cartel strongholds became battlegrounds. Gunfights erupted in broad daylight, leaving city streets littered with bodies. Sinaloa hitmen ambushed Beltrán Leyva operatives in restaurants, on highways, and even inside government-protected zones. Safe houses were raided, cocaine shipments were hijacked, and high-ranking members of the Beltrán Leyva Organization were systematically eliminated. But Arturo was not a man to be easily cornered. With deep political connections and an army of killers at his disposal, he fought back with equal ferocity. He unleashed his own wave of terror, targeting El Chapo's lieutenants, allies, and even their families. Towns across Sinaloa, Sonora, and Guerrero were consumed by bloodshed. Ordinary citizens lived in fear, caught between two warring factions that showed no mercy. Then came one of the boldest moves of all. The Beltrán Leyva Organization allegedly put a massive bounty on El Chapo's head, offering millions to anyone who could kill him. This was unheard of, a direct challenge to the most powerful drug lord in Mexico. Assassins, both professional and desperate, lined up to try their luck. For years, the Sinaloa Cartel had operated as the dominant force in Mexico's drug trade, but now its very foundation was under attack. The war was no longer about drugs, money, or power. It was about revenge, a cycle of bloodshed with no end in sight. And at the center of it all stood two men, El Chapo and Arturo, locked in a deadly game where only one could survive. As the war between El Chapo and Arturo Beltrán Leyva raged on, the streets of Mexico became a battlefield soaked in blood. Entire towns fell under siege, assassinations became routine, and the once powerful alliance between the two cartel factions had disintegrated into a ruthless campaign of extermination. But despite the chaos, one undeniable truth remained. Arturo was running out of time. The government, long content to play one cartel against another, had now set its sights on Arturo. His organization had grown too violent, too unpredictable, and too dangerous even by cartel standards. With U.S. and Mexican intelligence agencies coordinating efforts, Arturo found himself in the crosshairs of a relentless manhunt. By December 2009, the net was closing in. His safe houses were raided, his men were arrested or killed, and his ability to maneuver was shrinking by the day. Then, on December 16th, Mexican Marines received a critical piece of intelligence. Arturo was hiding in a luxury apartment complex in Cuernavaca, a city south of Mexico City. What followed was a military operation unlike any before. In the dead of night, an elite special forces unit descended upon the complex. Arturo and his heavily armed bodyguards refused to surrender. A brutal firefight erupted, lasting for over 2 hours. The Marines used grenades, assault rifles, and even a helicopter gunship to suppress the cartel's defenses. The battle raged floor by floor, as Arturo's men fought desperately to protect their leader. But the inevitable came. Arturo Beltrán Leyva, the man who had once been El Chapo's closest ally, and later his most dangerous enemy, was shot multiple times and killed. His body lay in the wreckage of the penthouse, a grim testament to the brutal end of his reign. In an act of final humiliation, the Marines stripped his lifeless corpse, covered it in blood-stained pesos, and photographed it for the world to see. A message not just to the cartels, but to anyone who dared challenge the power of the state. With Arturo dead, the Beltrán Leyva Organization crumbled. Infighting, arrests, and assassinations dismantled what remained of his empire. But even in death, Arturo's legacy endured. His war with El Chapo had reshaped the landscape of Mexico's drug trade, leaving behind a blood-stained history of betrayal, vengeance, and destruction. Yet for El Chapo, the war was far from over. Even as one enemy fell, new threats emerged and the cycle of violence continued. Because in the world of the cartels, peace is never an option, only survival. Arturo Beltrán Leyva was dead. His body lay lifeless, riddled with bullets, a stark reminder of the cost of betrayal in the world of the cartels. His organization, once powerful enough to challenge El Chapo himself, collapsed in the wake of his demise. Some of his lieutenants attempted to take control, but without their leader, the Beltrán Leyva empire was doomed. Infighting, government crackdowns, and endless betrayals tore it apart piece by piece. For El Chapo, Arturo's death was a victory, but it was not the end. The drug trade didn't stop, the violence didn't fade, and new enemies rose to take the place of the old. The war that had claimed the lives of Édgar Guzmán and Alfredo Beltrán Leyva had set in motion a chain of bloodshed that would never truly end. Even El Chapo himself, once thought untouchable, would eventually meet his downfall. Years later, he would be captured, extradited, and sentenced to life in a U.S. prison, locked away in a cage, far from the empire he had built. Yet, despite the deaths, despite the arrests, the cartels continue to thrive. New leaders emerge, new wars erupt, and the cycle of violence continues, unchecked and unstoppable. The names change, but the story remains the same. If you found this deep dive into cartel history gripping, make sure to subscribe for more real-life crime stories, historical events, and the dark truths hidden beneath the surface. There's always another story to tell, and you won't want to miss it.